Perry Checker Jacket Jackson surveyed his parking lot from the sidewalk that runs parallel to the street in front of his dealership. PJ was constantly moving cars around the lot and experimenting with different looks. It was necessary to keep the place looking fresh and attractive. As the owner of the largest independent car dealership in Central Texas, PJ had a responsibility to his customers and his community to project a positive image. He learned this from his father, the previous Jackson Check Jacket. PJ knew that there were serious cracks in the foundation of his life, and that those cracks would have to be dealt with sooner rather than later. PJ hated change as much as the next person, and the thought of the upcoming changes he was considering left him in a state of anxiety and sadness, two feelings he was not used to. To take his mind off the oncoming storm, PJ reorganized the front sales area. Superior Cars and Trucks by Jackson's Check Jacket was founded in the late 60s by PJ's grandfather, Peter. After years of trying to win the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese people as a member of Special Forces Team A, Peter found himself at home in Jackson, Texas, with money in his hands and a limp in his left leg, courtesy of a 7.62 mm AK-47 bullet. The city of Jackson was in Jackson County, about an hour northwest of Austin, Texas. Founded by PJ's ancestor, Jeremiah Buckskin Jacket Jackson in the 1830s, the town of Jackson grew into a sleepy hamlet. Peter looked around and saw the future, and decided that while the town of Jackson was now a sleepy village, it wouldn't always be that way. As Austin grows thanks to the University of Texas and the fact that Austin is the state capital, there will come a time when the city of Jackson will grow exponentially. Peter needed to find a business that would also grow. He knew cars and he knew murder, and while it was possible to make a living from both, he decided that selling cars was the safer and smarter long-term choice. So he bought an existing car dealership, a small dirt parking lot with lots of signs saying, "We accept installments," and "Buy here, pay here." Peter's first improvement was to pave the parking lot so it would no longer be muddy. Peter's second achievement was that he hired Laura Pulver as a full-time salesperson, even though she constantly referred to herself as a saleswoman. Laura was a gorgeous strawberry blonde with long legs and high, perky breasts. A recent graduate of the University of Texas, she didn't know what she wanted out of life. Although she took teacher education courses at the University of Texas, the more time she spent with children as a student teacher, the less she liked the idea of teaching. What she never imagined was that she would end up selling used cars. She could even imagine marrying the owner of a car dealership. Peter was 6 years older than Laura and, after his time in Vietnam, was full of cynicism all his life. But she brought out the best in him, and he loved her in ways he never believed possible. They were a formidable team. Over time, Peter and Laura had a son, whom they named Philip, and then a daughter, whom they named Penny. As Philip and Penny grew, so did the city of Jackson. Art galleries and cafes began popping up as people discovered Jackson, and it quickly became a suburb of the Texas capital. As the city of Jackson grew, the car dealership couldn't quite keep up with the growth. Peter knew that although car sales were good, they needed to be better. Peter's father, Thomas, known as Field Jacket Jackson, was an infantry officer during World War II. He saw action throughout Europe and returned to America with a chest full of medals and a German wife. Central Texas has a strong German culture and influence, so Betty Jackson felt right at home in her new country. Both children, Philip and Penny, inherited their mother's blonde hair and Germanic features. Peter eventually realized that working hard at the car dealership was not bringing him success, and asked his father to meet with him to see if he had any ideas on how to grow the business. They met at the Jackson County Country Club, where Thomas was not only a member, but also one of the directors. Peter explained the situation and asked his father if he had any ideas on how to grow the business. Thomas thought for a minute, leaned back, and took a sip of his bourbon. "Look around you, son. These people are your potential clients. What do you see? Why will they go to your car dealership and not another, to attract them?" Peter looked around the dining room. At that time, suits and ties were still required in private club dining rooms. It was the 70s, and loud checks and loud colors reigned supreme when it came to men's suits and sports jackets, especially in golf clubs. It also seemed to Peter that most of the clothes worn by the country club members were made from some kind of petroleum product rather than natural fibers. As Peter looked around the dining room, an idea struck him. He understood what kind of jacket to wear. "You gave me an idea, Dad," said Peter. "I'll let you know how it goes." And so Superior Cars and Trucks, a car dealership from Jackson's check jacket, was born. Taking his cue from a character named Herb Tarlek from a popular 1970s sitcom who claimed to buy his clothes at a golf shop in Lexington, Kentucky, Peter soon began dressing as a caricature of a used car salesman, using himself in advertising and marketing and wearing the most ridiculous sports jackets he could find. The Jackson plaid jacket has become an icon in Central Texas. His commercials were funny and ridiculous. Peter was not afraid to make fun of himself and refused to take himself or his commercials seriously. And the business exploded. As his son Philip grew older and began to take an interest in the business, Peter began to fall ill. He soon learned the cause of his illness. The limp wasn't the only thing he brought back from Vietnam. Peter was exposed to Agency Orange while in the country. As Peter became more ill, he began to hand over the business to Philip, who, with the help of his mother Laura, was able to continue the business without missing a step. Penny got married her senior year of high school after becoming pregnant by her boyfriend, a starting linebacker for the Jackson High School Jaguars named Brett, who was also her second cousin. After 5 years of marriage and a 6-year gap between children, they had 3 children before Penny's husband left for a 6-pack of beer and never returned. Penny barely noticed that her husband was gone, and in truth, the only person who really missed him was his father, Teague Jackson, and that was only because Brett was a genius at laying out weld beads in the family shop. By the time Philip, too, her bubbly, fun-loving personality instantly attracted PJ to her. It didn't take long before they started dating exclusively. PJ and Carol married within a year of her college graduation, and she was immediately hired as an English teacher at Jackson High School. PJ's father, Philip, wasn't a fan of Carol, but PJ couldn't be convinced. Philip considered requiring Carol to sign a prenuptial agreement before the wedding, but after consulting with Sharkskin Jacket, he decided that the trust sufficiently protected the family assets. PJ was standing in front of his car dealership when a rental car pulled into the lot, parked, and a tall, slender, red-haired beauty emerged from the driver's door. She was wearing jeans, a navy blue Ralph Lauren polo t-shirt, and Tory Burch shoes. PJ had never seen this woman in town before, so he walked over to introduce himself and welcome her to Superior Cars and Trucks by Jackson's Check Jacket. "Hi, welcome to Superior Cars and Trucks from Jackson's Check Jacket. I'm PJ, the owner. I don't think I've seen you around town before. This is my first time in the city of Jackson. I have an interview tomorrow, and I'm checking out your city. It's charming." "Most of it," PJ said, unwittingly remembering his problems with his wife. "We have a great downtown, and with the Colorado River running right next to downtown, there are a lot of restaurants and galleries. It's a pretty cool place to live. Who are you interviewing with, if it's not a secret?" "Not a secret at all. It's with the county school board." PJ nodded after hearing this. "I knew they had one more interview scheduled before they made a decision, so it must be you. I'm on the city council and a county commissioner, so I'm hearing some things," PJ explained. "My name is Roisin Baker," she said, shaking PJ's hand firmly, pronouncing her name Roisin. "I don't think I've ever met anyone with that name," PJ said. Roisin's makeup was light and tastefully applied. She was strikingly beautiful with green eyes that were accentuated by her red hair and a light sprinkling of freckles on her nose. She seemed to be between 30 and 35 years old. "And by the grace of God, you'll never meet anyone else with that name," she laughed. "That's a terrible name for a child living anywhere other than Ireland. Please call me Rose." "Perry Jackson, known as PJ." "Ah, Jackson. Now I understand. Are your family the same Jacksons from the city of Jackson and Jackson County?" she asked. PJ nodded affirmatively, and they continued talking about the city while he showed Roshan the car dealership. She explained that she was currently one of the deputy superintendents of schools for the Chicago School District, and because she lived and worked downtown, she did not have a car. She looked around car dealerships to see what was available and prices, having not owned a car for several years. PJ, aware of the school's superintendent's salary, was leading her toward the BMW and Mercedes when she changed course and headed toward the Lincoln subs. If I ever decide I'm not spending enough of my salary on car repairs and maintenance, I'll look at those over engineered German cars, she said. PJ looked at her dumbfounded. In his experience, every woman wanted to be seen in a high-end German car, not some American SUV, even if it was a Lincoln. His wife, Carol, insisted that he find her a Porsche Cayenne. My father came to the US straight out of Trinity College, Dublin, with a mechanical engineering degree in one hand and a job offer from Ford in the other, she explained. He worked at Ford headquarters in Dearborn for 30 years before retiring and moving to an over 55 golf community outside of Dallas. That's another reason I'm interviewing here. It would be a 4-hour trip. To visit my parents at the Franklin farm. Even if I didn't hate flying, carrying a suitcase to the Blue Line, then taking the train to O'Hare, then going through security, and then sitting and waiting to board. She shook her head at this thought. A 4-hour car ride was the ideal border for visiting my parents. As they walked back to her rental car, PJ told her about her competition for the position and some of the challenges the new superintendent of schools would face. The leading candidate is Elmer Hudson. He is the high school principal, but has been serving as interim superintendent since Ben Fowler, the previous superintendent, retired. Elmer seems to be doing a good job and has several friends on the school board. My wife, Carol, is acting high school principal, while Elmer is serving as superintendent. The school board has not been impressed with any of the candidates they have interviewed so far. What you're saying is that I'm probably wasting my time on this interview. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I have a feeling there's a change on the horizon. The school board has scheduled a public meeting in a few days so Superintendent of Schools Hudson can tell the city about some proposed school policy changes. I'm pretty confident that these changes will affect many people. Take the interview and amaze them. You never know what can happen in life. Rose said she would let him know about the results of the interview before leaving town. PJ watched her leave with a dreamy look as she drove out of the parking lot in her rental car. He felt something and wondered if she felt it too. Sighing, he turned to see what changes he could make to freshen up the showroom. While PJ was looking at the selection of convertibles, trying to decide whether to move them to the front of the sales area, his nephew, Billy, approached him. Hey PJ, I checked out this auction Corvette and you got it for next to nothing. It needs nothing more than an oil change. I told Benny to change it and then let him go early. Today is his anniversary, and I told him, so that he takes the rest of the day and tomorrow to spend with Anita. As you see fit, Billy. You're in charge here. PJ smiled to himself, thinking about Billy being in charge now. It seemed like it was yesterday when his sister Candy asked him for a job for her ex-convict son. He hadn't spoken to Candy for months, and her first words were to give her son a job. 24 months ago. Do you have a job for him or not? He needs something to do before he goes back to jail. PJ looked at his sister in surprise. He's going back to jail? I thought he just got out. A few weeks after graduating from high school, his nephew Billy was caught with marijuana in his car. Although Billy denied the baggie was his, the district attorney charged him with possession with intent to distribute. It was complete crap, and PJ believed whatever you want in Billy's defense. You will still do it your way. Just don't expect me to welcome this little criminal with open arms. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, Buddy said. They sat in PJ's office again, sipping glasses of bourbon. Tell me everything, PJ said. Well, remember the old Jeep Cherokee that Donnie Slater brought over for us to see if we could fix it? PJ waved his hand. He vaguely remembered the story, but couldn't remember the details. Donnie bought this Jeep from your grandfather about 30 years ago, so it's come a long way. Donnie was complaining that it was stalling every now and then. Donnie went to 6 shops, including a Jeep dealer in Austin, but no one could find the problem. Every shop I could reproduce the complaint once or twice, but the damn thing always started again. No one could figure it out, including me. Buddy took a sip of his bourbon and leaned back in the visitor's chair in PJ's office with a smug grin. It only took your nephew 2 minutes to diagnose the problem. And what was that? Asked PJ. Donnie replaced the battery himself a few months ago. AutoZone didn't have the correct battery, but they gave him one that they said was the same length and width as his old one. And it was. The problem is that it was about 1.5 inches higher. This wouldn't normally be a problem if it weren't for the fact that Donnie also had a broken left engine mount, and the hood insulation was worn out in some places. When Donnie pressed the gas, the engine would rock up and the battery contacts would touch the steel hood, which led to the computer shutting down. Buddy chuckled as he told the story to PJ. You should have seen Donnie. He told me he doesn't want anyone but Billy touching his cars now. PJ smiled to himself. Donnie Slater brought in about 3 trucks a year for his excavator business. Satisfying Donnie Slater was paramount. Later, PJ specifically stood in the service department when Billy came out. Great job with Donnie Slater's Jeep, PJ said. Have you heard about this? Billy asked in surprise before blushing and looking down. I try to keep an eye on what's going on in my service department, PJ said dryly. Billy, come walk with me. I heard your mom is trying to charge you rent. I'd like to talk to you about an alternative that might interest you. The doctor will be with you now, the nurse said. Carol and PJ sat in the chairs assigned to them. They were meeting in a doctor's office, not an exam room, so PJ knew it wouldn't be good news. He and Carol had been trying to have a child for many years. Carol suffered several miscarriages, each of which sent her deeper into depression, leaving PJ helpless in the face of her suffering. She refused any therapy or counseling, preferring to deal with mental and emotional pain on her own. Dr. Pels Ellsberg entered the office abruptly and sat down at his desk, putting down his folder. Mr. Dees and Mrs. Jackson, there is no easy way to approach this conversation, so I will be blunt. Mrs. Jackson, your womb is not capable of bearing a child. PJ stared at the doctor, shocked by the coldness of his manner. Dr. T. Ellsberg continued talking, using terms like hostile uterine environment, but by this point PJ had passed out. It all came down to one thing: they could not have children. On the drive back to the city of Jackson, it seemed like a curtain had fallen on Carol's emotions. Well, that settles the matter, she said in a matter-of-fact tone. I think you want a divorce now. PJ couldn't believe his ears. How can you ask that? I want to spend my whole life with you. Yes, I'm disappointed that we can't have children. But honey, that's not why I married you. I'm your life partner, just as you are mine. No one and nothing will come between us. You must know this. Carol said nothing as she stared out the car window, watching the landscape pass by in a blur. Carol eventually went to therapy and saw counselors and gradually accepted the doctor's statement, but the diagnosis changed her fundamentally. The happy, loving, carefree student that PJ fell in love with has disappeared. In her place was an angry, embittered vixen who unfairly blamed PJ for the fact that she would never be able to become a mother. When PJ suggested they adopt a child, she looked at him with a devastating look and said that she would rather strangle him in his sleep than raise someone else's unwanted child. PJ stared at his wife in shock and disappointment and realized that their marriage was in serious danger. As she aged and her first gray hair began to appear, she began to dye it. Gone were the magnificent flowing copper locks. They were replaced by a terrible dye that PJ privately called bozo orange, although in reality it was just a brighter shade of red than her natural hair color. She also changed her hairstyle. Instead of wearing her hair to her shoulders or in a ponytail, she now styled it in a 1960s style. PJ began to think of her as a copperhead, a poisonous bastard. Carol also joined several volunteer organizations. She claimed that she wanted to give back to the community, but PJ believed that she joined the groups to distance herself from her husband and spend less time with him. 12 months ago. "Did you have time to look at that Audi?" asked PJ. Billy had a look of disgust on his face that he had learned from PJ when it came to German cars. "Yes, in pretty good condition, considering that it's an Audi. The rear tires need to be replaced and a wheel alignment done, new windshield wipers, front and rear brake pads and discs. It looks like the timing belt has already been replaced." PJ nodded. It could have been worse. Buddy accepted the car as a trade-in, and PJ was worried about the necessary repairs. Considering the cost of replacing an Audi timing belt, the fact that it didn't have to be done was a huge plus. PJ wouldn't allow the car to be sold if the timing belt needed replacing, and Audi would have cost almost $1,000 to replace the belt and water pump even at internal rebuild rates. This would seriously reduce profits when putting the Audi up for sale. Call Napa Jacket Parts and order the parts you need, plus a couple of Bridgestones from Tire Rack. Good job, Billy. And it was really good work. Billy had blossomed over the past year, allowing Buddy to move into sales, which he was very happy with. Billy still lived in the apartment above PJ's garage, and Carol continued to ignore him. She didn't look him in the eyes and continued to call him a prisoner, even though he had been working for his uncle for a year. "What are you doing this weekend, Billy?" "The Carlos and Benny are taking me to the body shop to celebrate my first year here," Billy said. "I think I went to school with one of the dancers from there. I'll go check it out." "Billy, although you didn't ask for advice, I'll give it to you. First, to paraphrase Nelson Algren, never get involved with a woman who has more problems than you. This means no chivalry on a white horse. If a woman can't stand up for herself and handle her life, you need to run away. Secondly, don't mess with single mothers. Never. If you do this, you will be embroiled in drama beyond your worst nightmares. And thirdly, don't mess with crazy people. You will probably break at least one of these rules, and maybe all three, when you are young. But if you remember them in time, they will save you from a lot of trouble, especially if you're hanging out at a nightclub." Billy rolled his eyes at his uncle and left to meet with his colleagues. Billy didn't understand what PJ was talking about. He was always quoting someone and telling Billy to watch this. Who is this Nelson Al someone? To hell with him. What does PJ even know about life? What Billy knew was that tonight was going to be epic. PJ gave him his monthly bonus a week early. "Did you hear that Ben Fowler is retiring in 6 months as headmaster?" Carol asked her husband over dinner. PJ looked up in surprise. "No, I didn't hear anything," PJ admitted. "Why did he decide to leave?" "He was diagnosed with atrial fibrillation," Carol said. "He wants to take care of his health and travel around the country with his wife in their motorhome. He says that stress from work can give him a heart attack. He's stressed at work only because he's terrible at his job. I wonder what the school board thinks of the new principal," PJ said. "They were discussing the appointment of Elmer Hudson as acting director," Carol answered. PJ winced. Elmer Hudson was a New Yorker who was hired 3 years ago as a high school principal. Secretly, PJ thought Elmer was a little sycophant. Elmer could be formal at times and seem whiny at others. His hiring preceded most of the current school board members, although PJ knew that some board members thought highly of him. "Elmer asked me if I would be interested in becoming the acting principal of the high school if he became acting principal," Carol said. "I said I'd think about it, but I wanted to talk to you first. You always talked about getting involved in the administrative side of education. If this is what you want, go for it." "Thank you, PJ. I didn't think you'd have any objections," Carol said. She was toying with an idea, but if everything worked out, she would get everything she wanted. Billy experienced sensory overload when he walked into the body shop. The club had one large main stage and 2 small stages, each with one dancer dancing to old rock hits. The audience was diverse: construction workers, migrants, truck drivers, and mechanics. There were several guys sitting at the bar wearing the colors of the Bandidos motorcycle gang. They ignored the dancers and continued to do so until the one they owned came up and announced that she had caught a client and would be gone for an hour or two or even all night. The girls were different, from plump to thin, from not very attractive to quite nice. One girl approached Billy and asked if he wanted a private dance. Billy thought she was beautiful until she smiled, revealing that all the teeth on the left side were missing. Billy noticed another dancer had a bright pink scar running from her navel to just below her right breast. "Is it appendicitis or something?" Billy asked his colleagues. Benny Ortega laughed. "No, my hermano. Someone tried to gut this bitch. All the hot dancers go to Dallas, Houston, or Austin to dance," Carlos Hernandez said. Carlos H. was a plump, 45-year-old divorcee. "We get leftovers." "Yes," agreed Carlos Rivera. "But if you want to have sex with a dancer in Dallas, you have to pay a lot of money. These girls are much cheaper for the night." "Are they all girls of easy virtue?" Billy asked in surprise. He thought they were only dancing. "Not everyone," said Benny Ortega. "Maybe half the girls here are girls for money on the side. What is called in the game. The rest are just dancers. Some are single mothers and some are in college. Or so they say. Don't believe a word these crazy bitches say," Benny laughed. The four men watched as the dancers moved from the main stage to each of the smaller stages in turn, and then left the room, only to return a few minutes later, covered in a top or suit, wooing customers, offering to buy them an expensive drink, a private dance, or a trip to the VIP private dance room. The men stayed there for an hour, and Billy's arousal level dropped significantly during that time. He was already thinking about how to tactfully leave when the DJ announced the next dancer. For the first time on stage tonight, former Jackson High Jaguars cheerleader captain, please welcome the beautiful Amber Lynn. Billy watched without taking his eyes off as Amber Lynn Dawson walked onto the stage. The crowd clearly knew who Amber Lynn was and burst into applause. Blonde, with a round butt and C-cup breasts, Amber Lynn was the most beautiful woman there, and, in Billy's opinion, even more beautiful than when she walked the halls of Jackson High in her cheerleader uniform. Amber Lynn danced and showed off her denim shorts, cut to show almost her entire butt, to a Flo Rida song. Shawty had them apple-bottom jeans, boots with the fur. The whole club was looking at her. She hit the floor. Next thing you know, Shawty got low, 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 low. Amber Lynn performs a perfect split, while Flo Rida sings low, low, low. Fascinated, Billy walked up to the stage holding dollar bills. Amber Lynn noticed Billy standing at the edge of the stage with his mouth open and looking at her. "Hey, handsome," she said, crouching in front of him and pulling the waistband of her jean shorts out, so he could insert his bills between them and her shiny, sparkling belly. "You are familiar to me. Did we go to the same school?" Billy was stunned and could only nod his head quickly. "Let's do this. When I finish my performance, I'll come to you and we'll chat." Billy nodded his head so quickly that Amber was afraid he might get a concussion. Billy went to the body shop every night when Amber Lynn worked. She would sit down with him for half an hour, give him a couple of lap dances during that time, and let him buy her a champagne of ginger ale and pineapple juice. She would then either go on stage or walk around the room offering private dances to other clients. After an hour and a half, she returned to Billy's table for half an hour, during which time he again bought her lap dances. During their meetings, Amber told Billy her life story. Her ex-boyfriend got her pregnant, and when they found out, her very religious parents kicked her out of the house and disowned her. She and her 3-year-old son shared an apartment with a roommate, and with no other job skills, Amber Lynn was forced to start dancing, even though it went against her inner beliefs. She really wanted to go to college and become a nurse. Billy was devastated about Amber Lynn and her baby. In her third week of almost nightly visits to the body shop, Amber was visibly upset and quickly shared her concerns with Billy. "I took Jamie, my son, to the doctor because of his asthma. The doctor prescribed him new medications, but since I don't have health insurance, I have to pay cash. This means I won't be able to pay my rent, and my roommate says if I can't pay my rent, I won't be able to stay. Oh, Billy, I do not know what to do. Where will I find $1,000? Amber Lynn cried. I would give you money, Amber, but I spent so much money here that I don't have any. That's so nice of you, Billy. I know we just started dating, and I don't know if you'd even consider someone like me as your girlfriend, but if you could help me out, I'd really appreciate it. Billy's chest swelled as he thought about the former cheerleader captain becoming his girlfriend. I'll find the money. Let me think of something, Billy said. Hey, PJ, do you have a minute? Billy said, standing in the doorway of his uncle's office. Of course, Billy. Come in and sit down, PJ said, pointing to one of the chairs in front of his desk. What's the matter? I was hoping I could get an advance, Billy said. Prepaid expense? PJ asked in surprise. I don't want to pry into your business, Billy, but where does your money go? I pay you a good salary, and I don't charge you rent. You must have saved a lot of money. I'm dating a girl, Billy said. She has a child, and I help her a little. It's clear. Does this girl have a name? Is she local? Amber Lynn Dawson. She was a cheerleader at Jackson High when I was there. Dawson, PJ said, looking up thoughtfully. Is she Fred Dawson's eldest daughter? He is a minister at the Church of Christ on Centerville Road. I seem to remember he had a daughter who, a few years ago, took the plunge and became a dancer. Her boyfriend got her pregnant and left her, and her disgusting parents kicked her out, Billy said with irritation. I think I heard something about stolen credit cards and a bunch of her parents' stuff that ended up in a pawn shop in Austin, PJ said. I don't believe it, Billy replied. How much do you need? I need $1,000, Billy said. Do you remember what I told you about staying away from single mothers and not being a knight on a white horse? I remember, but Amber Lynn is different. PJ looked at Billy carefully, contemplating his next move. That's what I'll do, Billy. I'll give you this 1,000, not like an advance or a loan. I'll just give you the money, but there's one condition. Which? Billy asked suspiciously. I want a selfie of you too, but it should be done in her home where you hug her, and you can't tell her why you need this photo. That's it, Billy. Just take this selfie for me, and I'll give you money. Today is not a good day, Billy, Amber Lynn said. My roommate is mad at me, and Jamie doesn't feel well. Maybe next week sometime, but not this week. Are you ashamed of me or your place? Billy asked. He knew that she lived in a rather run-down part of town. Or are you embarrassed of me? Oh, no, honey. I can't wait for you to come over to our house and meet Jamie. But maybe next week, okay? Now do you want a private dance? That evening, Billy did something he would never admit to anyone. He followed Amber Lynn home. He saw her stop at the apartment, open the door, and enter. Billy noticed that the light was already on, which meant her roommate was home, keeping an eye on Jamie. Billy waited for 30 minutes, working up his courage, but in the end, it was for Amber and Jamie, right? It was a simple request, even if a little strange, a selfie of the two of them in her apartment. Billy took a deep breath and knocked on Amber's door. A minute later, the door was answered by a tall man with thinning hair and tattoos on his arms, who looked about the same as Amber. The man was holding a cigarette in one hand and a can of Budweiser beer in the other. His belly hung slightly over his belt, and he looked like a former athlete who had neglected himself. Who the hell are you? He asked. I came to see Amber Lynn, Billy answered. Who is it, Daddy? Billy heard Amber Lynn's voice asking a question. A second later, she came into view, standing with a child on her hip, her robe unbuttoned, showing her underwear. Billy, she exclaimed. Hello, Amber Lynn. I was hoping to talk to you. Amber sighed, looking first at Billy, and then at the man who was still standing in the doorway. She handed the child to the man and said, Daddy, look after Jamie. I'll talk to Billy for a minute. The man snatched the baby from Amber and looked at Billy with contempt before turning and entering the apartment. Amber walked out onto the small area in front of the apartment and closed the door behind her. She buttoned up her robe and crossed her arms defensively before asking, What are you doing here, Billy? I wanted to talk to you. I think I found a way to get you $1,000 for your baby's medicine and rent. Who is this man? You called him Daddy. Is he Jamie's father? Amber Lynn nodded her head. Yes, Billy, but that's not why I call him Daddy. He studied with us at school. Dave Davis, he was on the football team. Amber looked at Billy and shook her head. You shouldn't have come here. Perhaps you were following me from the club. Billy nodded in response to her question. Why did you think it was okay, Billy? This is persecution. Besides, now Dave will think that there is something between us. I think I found a way to get you $1,000. Amber exhaled slowly, deciding how best to play this game to keep Billy warm and heading back to the club. Looking into Billy's naive, trusting eyes, she made a decision. She decided to do the right thing for once in her life. Billy, my son is not sick, and I am not behind on rent. Dave is out of work, but we're keeping up with the bills. If we needed money, I would just catch a couple of clients at the club. As a last resort, I would go to Austin and go down South Congress Street. Daddy doesn't mind me working on the side because all the money goes to him. But I don't need to do that. You were very generous, Billy. Damn it, you paid our rent this month. But you and me, Billy, this isn't real. It's a game, Billy. That's what a gentleman's club is. This is fantasy. You don't have to fall in love with us. You just have to pretend to believe our bullshit stories until you leave the club after paying us for showing you our breasts. That's how the game is played, Billy. You knew she was married, Billy shouted at his uncle. You knew what would happen if I showed up at her house. That's why you asked for a selfie of the two of us at her house. Billy was angry at his uncle, angry at Amber Lynn, but most of all he was angry at himself for allowing someone to get close to him and disappoint him again. I didn't know she was married. I was pretty sure she was living with some guy because that's how they all live. Every dancer lives with some guy or girl. That's how it is, Billy. How do you know all this? Billy asked. Billy, good experience comes from experience. Experience comes from bad decisions. Do you think I didn't spend money at the body shop when I was your age? You're young, Billy, but you're picking up things quickly. When it comes to women, remember the 3 rules I told you. PJ looked at Billy's back as he sadly walked out of the office. 6 months ago. Officially, Elmer is the interim principal and I'm the interim high school principal, Carol said, happier than PJ had seen her in years. How long will it take to find a new director? If they are smart, they will make us permanent in our positions. The school board plans to begin the recruitment process next month. They said it would take up to 6 months to find, interview, and decide who the right candidate would be. Will this change anything in our daily lives? Asked PJ. I will have more meetings, and some of them will be after regular school hours. I think I'll have to work closely with Elmer as we get to grips with our positions. Be careful with this guy. I told you before that I don't trust him. Jesus, PJ, he's been my boss for the last 3 years. If he wanted to try something, he would have already done it. Just keep an eye on him, Carol. That's all I'm saying. Hi, honey, Carol said. I know we had plans to have dinner today, but I have to work late again. There is so much to learn and catch up on. Okay, thanks for the call. I guess I'll see you when I see you, PJ replied. Do not be like that. This won't last forever. Once I get comfortable in the position, I won't have to work as often. Elmer looked up from Carol's feet as she disconnected the call. It was the coolest thing I've ever done. It satisfied you while you were talking to your husband. Next time I want you to satisfy me while you talk to him. I want to humiliate this asshole. Carol shook her head at Elmer's comment. He was obsessed with proving his superiority over PJ. Well, it's better to just lie down and enjoy. 3 weeks ago, sitting at his desk, PJ contemplated his next steps. After thinking about what he wanted from life and the future, PJ picked up the phone to make a call. 405th Military Intelligence Brigade, says Specialist Keene. How can I help? I want to contact Colonel Wayne Jackson. This is his cousin, PJ. Just a minute, sir. I'll see if the colonel is there. PJ was prepared for a long wait, but only a few minutes passed. Hey, PJ, what happened? Colonel Wayne Field Jacket Jackson asked. Wayne inherited the nickname Field Jacket after the death of his great-grandfather Thomas, the original Field Jacket Jackson. Field Jacket was the commander of the 405th Military Intelligence Brigade, a position he had held for 6 years, well beyond the normal length of command. But Field Jacket believed that he had the best job in the Army and was ready to fight for it to the last. He was less than 2 hours from his hometown of Jackson City, and his staff was extremely competent, leaving him with very little to do. This gave him a lot of free time and the opportunity to travel around the country in his huge motorhome, pulling a trailer with equipment for barbecue competitions. Field Jacket's goal was to compete in a new barbecue competition each week, and he was willing to trade the General's Star to continue command of the 405th Brigade until his retirement. Hello, Field. I need your advice on one issue that is within your competence. Are you free for lunch tomorrow? I can't go to lunch, but I'm free for dinner. Out back at Sevenos. Although the 405th Brigade was located on the western side of the Fort Cavazos base, the nearby town of Copperas Cove was much smaller than Killeen, which had a better selection of restaurants. It was a slightly longer journey for each of them, but it guaranteed better food and more privacy. Suitable for me, PJ replied. See you there. Field Jacket never liked long conversations. Just taking that first step made PJ feel relieved. There were few better men in the world of espionage than Wayne Jackson. His cousin could advise him on how to gather evidence of his wife's infidelity, because PJ has little doubt that she is cheating on him. Her and a chubby bastard named Elmer Hudson. His next call was to his cousin Karen, Wayne's sister, who worked at the local Century 21 real estate office. PJ and Karen had never been particularly close, usually only seeing each other for holidays and family gatherings. They shared grandparents, but her mother Penny was never interested in the dealership except as a lasting resentment for not being paid from the family fund. PJ paid himself a salary, as he did all his employees, but did not pay himself bonuses or set himself an excessive salary. Every penny of profit was plowed back into the dealership to improve infrastructure and purchase inventory. Penny's dissatisfaction rubbed off on her daughter Karen, who was also experiencing the slow burn of not receiving payments from a dealership she felt was partly owned by her. PJ considered them both a couple of entitled nutjobs. Her grandfather bequeathed other assets to them after removing them from the trust, which included a dealership and a farm. They never showed any interest, and Peter took care of his daughter Penny in other ways. When their very healthy and active grandmother Laura died, Karen would be entitled to an additional inheritance. But the weight was killing both Penny and her daughter Karen. Despite her best efforts, no one called Karen Gold Jacket Jackson after her employer, instead giving her the nickname Yellow Jacket, which greatly annoyed her. Karen didn't realize that the nickname had as much to do with her complaints and harsh comments as it did with the color of her Century 21 sports jacket. But as PJ admitted, she was a damn good realtor. Karen agreed to find several rental options for PJ. She didn't ask why he needed the rent, but she could guess the reason for his request. She seemed almost gleeful in anticipation of the coming disaster, which prompted PJ to look for a rental. How do you know that she is cheating on you? Wayne Jackson asked his cousin, who was munching on a large bloomin' onion ring at the Outback Steakhouse in Killeen, Texas, a city of just over 150,000 people, most of whom made their living from the soldiers of Fort Cavazos and their families, both legally and illegally. Like any town near a military base, Killeen had more than its fair share of pawn shops, nightclubs, and bail loan stores. The city also had many drug dealers and readily available girls, both military and civilian. But this did not interest Field Jacket Jackson, unless one of the soldiers selling meth was also selling state secrets. In this case, he would watch him like a hawk. Colonel Wayne Jackson liked to tell people that his job was to keep communists out of Central Texas, and if that failed, to at least isolate them in the faculty room at the University of Texas. After PJ swallowed the onion ring, he said, I don't know exactly what she's cheating on, but I'll bet I'll give you a good chance. That's why I wanted your help. Have you talked to Shark Jacket? Wayne asked, referring to the senior partner of the law firm Bonham, McLeod, Garcia, who was also related to the Jacksons. No, I wanted to wait until I had proof before talking to him. I think that as soon as I attract him, a full-scale war will begin. I've already talked to Yellow Jacket about looking for a rental. How is Yellow Jacket? The last time I spoke to my sister was at a family reunion last year. She came up to me, told me to go to hell, and left. I still don't know what I did to piss her off, Field Jacket said, shaking his head. You were lucky that you were older than all of us and didn't have to spend every day with them. How can two sisters be so different? One is normal, married with children and active in society, and the other is crazy. Wayne laughed. You haven't seen true madness until you spent time with Uncle Straight Jacket Jackson. It's crazy to see this madman running naked down a church aisle with a lit firework up his ass, waving his dignity in one hand and a bottle of whiskey in the other, singing the battle hymn of the Republic at the top of his lungs. I was there. It was quite a wedding, wasn't it? PJ laughed, shaking his head. Back to my problem. I know I need to meet Jacket Shark, but this seems like such a final step. It's like once I do this, there's no going back. My advice is to meet him as soon as possible. Do what he tells you. Okay, I'll call him. What about collecting evidence? I have a couple of guys who recently returned to the 405th Brigade. They need to take a vacation, but they don't have a family, so this is just right for them. Pay for the hotel, for the food and cash under the table, and if there is something to be found, they will find it. I hope you understand that whatever they find won't be used in court. You will receive evidence of treason, but you will not be able to use it in court. PJ shook his head in disgust. Yes, I know. Damn innocent breeding. But I need to know for sure. If there's even a 0.1% chance that she's not cheating on me, I should give her a chance before I burn any bridges. PJ sat down across from the two men after introducing himself. They introduced themselves as Tim Jones and Tom Smith. Tom had a southern accent, clearly from the deep south, either Mississippi or Alabama, but Tim had an accent that PJ couldn't place. Slightly British, it could also be Australian or New Zealand. None of the above, buddy, Tim answered PJ's question. I grew up in New Mexico on a ranch near a little town you've probably never heard of called North Fork. I was raised by my widowed father with a little help from his friend, the city marshal, a fine old fellow who only had one arm. PJ stared slack-jawed at the soldier. He wasn't sure if Tim was joking or crazy. He spoke with such sincerity, but PJ's inner voice screamed at him. He's telling you the plot of the old TV show Shotgun, so he's either joking or crazy. So, the colonel said you might have a job for us, Tom said, bringing the conversation back on track with a sidelong glance at his partner. Tim's real name was Mark McCain, the same as the son in the old TV Western, so this wasn't the first time Tom had heard his partner's fantastical retelling of his supposed past as the son of a gun-wielding New Mexico ranchero. PJ hesitated, looking closely at Tim. Yes, I think my wife is cheating on me, and I want proof. I booked a couple of motel rooms for you and this. PJ handed each of the men preloaded debit cards. Each card is loaded with $1,000, and your numbers have already been paid for. The men agreed on payment terms and discussed what evidence PJ needed to collect. He then handed the men photographs of his wife and Elmer Hudson. Is your wife cheating on you with that bastard? Tim asked in surprise. PJ knew that the British used the word bastard much more freely than the Americans. Further confirmation that Tim probably didn't grow up on a fictional ranch in a fictional New Mexico town. Don't make it worse, PJ replied. I always thought of Elmer as a chubby nitpicker. If he really is cheating on me with my wife, I want to burn him to the ground. Give us a week or so, Tim said in a southern drawl. If they are committing adultery, we will find evidence. PJ was thinking about Roisin Baker when he noticed an SUV crawling slowly down the road. PJ recognized the dark blue Ford Explorer as belonging to Alma Rodriguez. PJ personally delivered the SUV to her house last year after she bought it from his lot low miles and fully loaded. For Alma to slowly drive toward him at about 2 miles per hour, There had to be something seriously wrong with the car. She finally parked in front of PJ. "Good morning, Alma," PJ said, approaching her rolled-down window. "Problems this morning? I want to tell you that there is a problem. PJ, I've never felt this way. This truck shakes so much I can barely drive it. I almost had a stroke trying to go to the store this morning." "Let me ride it," PJ said as Alma climbed out of the driver's seat and he got behind the wheel. He put it in gear, stepped on the gas, and oh man, what the hell is going on here? He thought when the steering wheel slipped out of his hands. "We'll pick it up and see what's wrong. Do you want to wait while we check it out?" "No, PJ. Just call me when you find out what's going on. I trust you." And to PJ, those 3 words meant everything. His clients truly trusted him, just as they trusted his father and grandfather. PJ drove slowly to the service door, and when Billy saw him slowly moving forward, he approached the car to ask about the problem. "Strong vibration, and I mean really strong. It's absolutely impossible to go faster than 2 miles an hour," PJ said, getting out of the driver's seat. "Okay, I'll put it on a lift and check it. By the way, the copperhead is in your office." "Damn it," PJ said. "That's what I need this morning." "And you should have called her Aunt Carol instead of Copperhead. She's as evil as a snake, and as long as you call her Copperhead, I'll also call her Copperhead." "Yeah, but she's my wife," PJ said. "I've gotten used to her bites over the years." "You are not. She's a copper-headed waitress, tired and sharp-tongued. An ordinary woman is as ordinary as a rattlesnake." "What?" Billy asked. PJ was always saying weird things that didn't make sense. Billy knew that PJ was probably the smartest and most well-read person in the entire area, but damn, some of those quotes didn't make sense at all. Aunt Carol wasn't a waitress, she was a teacher. These are the first and last lines of a feminist poem called "Ella in a Square Apron Along Highway 80. This is the kind of crap they make you read at the University of Texas, Billy," PJ said. Billy rolled his eyes, glad college wasn't in his future as he backed the Ford onto a vacant lift. He had driven Highway 80 from Mesquite to Terrell about 100 times and didn't remember a single rattlesnake waitress along the way. Well, maybe the one behind the briquette counter at Buc-ee's. Billy popped the hood and quickly inspected the engine bay before installing the lift legs and pressing the buttons to raise the SUV. As PJ watched, Billy walked to the back of the car, bent down to inspect the suspension, and immediately let out a blood-curdling scream as he stumbled backwards, falling and crawling away from the SUV. "Snake! Snake! Snake!" Billy shouted. "The biggest damn snake I've ever seen." PJ jumped back, stunned by Billy's reaction. He stepped forward, bent under the rear bumper, and oh hell, what is this? PJ saw the biggest snake he had ever seen. The Burmese python was wrapped around the driveshaft of Alma's Explorer, its head resting near the rear differential. PJ walked the length of the Explorer, stopping at where the driveshaft attached to the transmission. He tugged at the python's tail, but knew that the snake was so tightly wrapped around the driveshaft that he had no chance of removing it alone. Python looked at PJ with his black snake eyes. The anger he felt towards PJ radiated off his skin like heat from a stove. PJ made a decision. "Billy, go and get my gun from the top right drawer of the desk." Billy grinned. Damn it. He rushed to the doors of the exhibition hall and to PJ's office. He returned in less than 2 minutes. "Copperhead was sitting at your desk on the computer. She saw me take your gun, and I told her you were going to shoot a big damn snake. She's mad, and she's coming here for me," he said, handing the gun to PJ. PJ sighed internally. Copperhead, or Carol, joined several progressive organizations in order to spend less time with her husband. One of these crazy organizations was PETA, so he knew there was going to be a storm over his plans to shoot the snake in the head. All he wanted to do was introduce Mr. Burmese Python to Mr. Colt Python and see who would win. He was betting on the 357 Magnum, which would soon enter Mr. Burmese Python's head at a muzzle velocity of 1,500 feet per second. Until I heard Copperhead scream, a completely different kind of snake. Perry Jackson. If you even point this gun at an animal, I'll cut off what's between your legs. Where is that poor snake you're going to kill? PJ nodded his head towards Explorer and said calmly, "Entwined around the drive shaft. She is not poisonous. Besides, you can't kill the poor creature," said Carol. She looked under the car and immediately jumped back, tripping over her own feet and landing with a crash on the polished cement floor of the service department. "Do you want to take him home, Aunt Carol?" Billy grinned. "Shut up, prisoner." "No, I don't want to take him home. Call the zoo and have them come and pick him up." PJ looked at his wife annoyed. "Have you read the newspapers? Recently, several such pythons were caught in the state. Zoos don't want them. They say to call animal control. The trapping service will just kill him, so we'll save everyone a lot of time and effort." "We'll see about that," Carol said, heading back to the office. Just as she sat back down at PJ's desk to make some calls, she heard the sound of a gunshot coming from the service area. "Bastard," she shouted into the empty office. She picked up the phone and dialed the number from memory. "Hello, dear. Are you free this afternoon?" It took Billy an hour to clear the car and the surrounding workshop area. Jackson police responded to a call about shots fired, but Billy explained that the car he was servicing simply misfired. The police did not find any problems, but had to check the situation. PJ was a city councilman and a respected member of the community, so the likelihood of shots being fired in his shop was unlikely, but the statement was made and had to be addressed. By the time the police finished their check and left, PJ noticed that his nephew was starting to get nervous. "What should I do with the python?" Billy asked. "How should I know?" PJ replied. "Did you see the snake recycling expert sign on my door? Throw it in the trash or put it on your mom's porch." Billy just rolled his eyes, something he did often while working for PJ. "Why are you so excited?" asked PJ. "I have a date today," Billy said with a big smile. "Is it true?" PJ asked with a grin. "Where does she dance?" "Damn it, PJ, she's not a dancer. She works at Dairy Queen in the evening and attends community college during the day. It's her only day off, so we go to dinner and a movie. Her name is Annie." "Well done, Billy." PJ reached into his pocket, took out $100 from his wallet, and put it in Billy's shirt pocket. "Let me contribute to your date." "Thank you, PJ. I don't know why Mom calls you a miserable bastard. I think you're quite normal." "Oh my God," Elmer breathed, rolling off Carol. "It takes my breath away. It was wonderful, honey. PJ can't cope." Carol rolled her eyes, but then looked tenderly at her lover. "Not like you. He simply can't match your skills. You send me to the moon every time. With him, I just think, I wish it would end soon." Elmer chuckled when he heard this. Ever since he moved to Jackson City, he'd always been a little jealous of PJ, and when he had the opportunity to sleep with the used car salesman's wife, he didn't think twice about it. His affair with Carol began because she wanted his job as headmaster and was willing to sleep with him to achieve it. He just wanted to set up the famous Jacksonian in a plaid jacket, the star of hundreds of local TV commercials. Stupid name. "What's new with the school council?" Carol asked. "Are they finished with the interview?" "They have another one tomorrow. Someone named Roshin," he said, pronouncing the name Roy Sin. "With a stupid name like that, and from Chicago, you know she's going to be a loud, opinionated black bitch with pretensions. I don't understand why the school board is even talking to her. Probably for variety." Carol nodded. Although he hid it in public, Carol was surprised by how casually racist Elmer was in private. However, she agreed with his opinion that the candidate from Chicago was probably invited for the sake of diversity. She saw a lot of news stories about the Chicago school system and sometimes wondered if there were any white children in Chicago schools. Carol was confident that Elmer would be appointed permanent superintendent and she would be promoted to principal. A decision was expected to be made by the end of the month, or even sooner if the interview with the candidate tomorrow fell through. Maybe the school board will announce the appointments at its next meeting. That would be ideal. Announce the joint raises at the same time as Elmer's proposed changes for the city are presented. Then she would just have to come up with a plan to end her relationship with Elmer Hudson. Having mediocre sex for a dream job is one thing, but sticking with it and risking marriage to PJ? Never. PJ was in a thoughtful mood that night, and Carol noticed it. "What happened, dear?" she asked. It occurred to her that she was using this address both for her husband and for her lover. She silently praised herself for her courage. PJ shrugged. "There are just some things to do in the parking lot that need to be taken care of. Nothing serious. Hey, do you know anything about those big changes Elmer is going to propose at the meeting?" "I know a little," she answered carefully, not wanting to give any additional details. "Well, what are they?" he finally asked. "I have no right to speak. You should hear them at the same time as the rest of the city. You remember that I'm your husband, right? Are we going to hide from each other now? You are hiding something from me? I heard you were talking to some girl in your parking lot. Is there something you want to tell me?" PJ looked at his wife in shock. "Are you talking about Rose Baker, superintendent candidate?" "Oh, Rose then? I thought her name was Roisin," Carol said, mispronouncing the name again. "It's pronounced Roshin, but she prefers Rose. She was looking for a car in case she was hired as a superintendent. Well, she can go back to Chicago or wherever she came from, because Elmer Hudson will get the job," Carol blurted out. "You know," PJ said, his eyes narrowing as he looked at his wife, "nothing in this life is guaranteed, especially when it comes to a pathetic asshole like Elmer Hudson." Carol snorted and went into the bedroom, slamming the door loudly. 3 days ago. The next day, PJ was sitting at his desk when Wilma Harkrider, one of his sales managers, knocked on his office door, followed by Rose Baker. "You have a visitor, PJ," Wilma said. PJ jumped to his feet. "Thank you, Wilma." "Hello, Rose. Sit down," PJ said, leading her to a leather sofa that stood against the wall perpendicular to his desk. "How did the interview go?" "I think it's pretty good. I talked to them for more than 3 hours. This is a good sign. No other interview lasted longer than 90 minutes. I wanted to thank you for your clues about the problems the new superintendent will face. I prepared the answers, and the council president seemed pleased with my answers. The school board president seems to have a good understanding of the challenges facing the school district in the future. I was very impressed with her. The other 3 interviewers, I think, had already decided in advance what they didn't like." Rose shrugged, raising her hands, palms up. "I think they didn't like me." "Was one of them a short guy with short hair? Look like someone whose parents are perhaps on the same family tree?" asked PJ. "That's exactly his description," Rose laughed. "This is Bernie Woodhouse. He is Elmer Hudson's best friend and is as witty as a bag of wet hair. He's the longest-serving member of the school board, so Aaron Hayes, the board president, has to let him interview with her. He is one of 3 votes that Elmer has already won on his side. I think the other 2 were women, both blondes, looked like you could be on the cover of Cold Bitch magazine." Rose nodded her head quickly. "What's their problem? Let's go to Naomi's diner across the street, have lunch, and I'll tell you why you might still have a chance at this job." "How familiar are you with Muff?" PJ asked, laughing as they sat down at a table in the diner. Moms United for Freedom was one of several groups that emerged in recent years with the express purpose of placing members on school boards. Various groups of this nature have acquired nicknames such as the Casserole Cassettes, Pot Crazy, and the Minivan Taliban. This particular group was founded in Grapevine, Texas, 2 years ago by Lucinda Neff Dupree, the wife of District Judge Nathan Dupree, who is currently on trial for bribery. To make matters worse, the family's nanny recently disclosed a long-term sexual relationship with Dupree that began shortly after her 18th birthday, and in which Judge Dupree videotaped sexual encounters between his wife and the nanny. Lucinda was forced to leave the group she founded. Neither Lucinda Neff Dupree nor her followers noticed the unfortunate acronym that arose when creating the band's name, perhaps due to a certain naivety, or, as PJ thought, perhaps ignorance born of arrogance. However, this was not discovered until $250,000 in merchandising costs had been ordered and prepaid. wasn't noticed until bumper stickers that read, "I love Muff" didn't fly off the shelves, and then the founders of Moms United for Freedom realized what was happening, but it was too late. Muff mania had already spread. "What questions did the interviewers ask?" asked PJ. The one who introduced herself as Mindy started with questions, Rose said, describing the interview to PJ. "You have to deal with a lot of minority kids in Chicago, don't you?" asked Mindy Snyder. "I'm not sure what you mean by dealing with, but I interact with children of all nationalities, as well as their parents," Rose replied. "I'm worried about someone bringing the enlightened agenda into our school system," Mindy said. "I don't quite understand what you mean by enlightened," Rose answered carefully. "Enlightened? You know what it is. You hear about this every day." Mindy almost screamed at her. "Perhaps if you could give an example," Rose replied. Mindy opened her mouth to answer, but closed it just as quickly, realizing she couldn't think of an example. Rose noticed that the student council president, who had not asked questions up to this point, seemed to be hiding a smile behind her hand. "How about an abortion?" asked Bernie Woodhouse. "How do you feel about abortion?" At that moment, Rose realized what the student council's agenda was and decided to come out of the situation with honor. "Is this one of my responsibilities as superintendent? I've never had an abortion before, but if you have a training program, I'm willing to learn," Rose said with a sincere expression on her face. The three student council members looked at her in horror. "No, no, the superintendent should not perform abortions. What kind of school system do you think we're running here? Why did you even ask such a question?" Mandy Landry yelled at Rose. "Because I can't think of any other reason why you would ask such personal questions that have absolutely nothing to do with my ability to do my job." By this point, Rose was pretty sure the council president was trying not to laugh. Rose didn't know if she was laughing at her or with her. "Racial theory," Mindy shouted as soon as the example of the enlightened one came to her mind. Mandy and Bernie simply looked at Mindy in confusion after her attack. "So I think I won't buy a car from you," Rose smiled sadly. The interview only got worse after that until the student council president started asking questions. She was to the point in her questions, but with 3 of the 4 board members hating me, I'm confident Elmer's job is secure. "7, PJ said. "7 what?" asked Rose. "There are 7 members on the school council. The 3 you met, plus the council president and 3 other members. They gave their vote to the president to vote as she sees fit," PJ said. His lunch with Rose went very well. There was a connection between them that they both felt. They spent 2 hours telling each other their life stories. Rose was 38 years old and had already been married once. She learned her marriage was on the rocks when her husband's very pregnant assistant showed up on her doorstep, explaining to a surprised Rose that she needed to stop fighting for a divorce. Rose told the pregnant woman that she was convinced and that she would finalize the divorce as soon as possible. She told PJ about life in downtown Chicago and how she stepped away from the dating scene. "I can't use Tinder. I just cannot. I have nothing against online dating, but these days it's all about quick meets. This is not for me." PJ told Rose about his suspicions that his wife was cheating on him and who he suspected was her lover. PJ also told her about his plans to end this affair. Rose laughed cheerfully at PJ's plans. "How do you know all this?" asked Rose. "Elmer Hudson isn't the only one who has friends on the student council," PJ replied with a grin. "You should stay a few days. Travel to Austin or San Antonio to visit the River Walk. San Marcos has a huge shopping center that is worth a visit, and then come back 3 days later for the big meeting." PJ stood in the parking lot of his car dealership again. The weather has become warmer and hot days will soon arrive. PJ noticed a car pulling up to the dealership with steam coming from under the hood. As the car approached, the driver was visible only from the top of his head and both hands on the steering wheel. PJ noted that it was a Chevrolet Trailblazer that he had sold to Mary Lou Hodges 2 years ago. Mrs. Hodges taught English at Jackson High School for nearly 90 years before retiring. Or so it seemed, because she taught everyone in Jackson County, parents, grandparents, and in some cases, great-grandparents. "Hello, Mrs. Hodges," PJ said as the car pulled up in front of him. "Looks like you have an overheating problem." "I'm afraid so, PJ. I plan to go around my area posting reward signs for the return of Mr. Mittens since he had been missing for several days. I heard a knocking noise when I started the car, but it seemed to be running fine. I was putting up my signs when steam started coming out from under the hood. Can you check? I'll have Billy look at it as soon as he gets here," PJ said. "How's Billy? Does he stay out of trouble? He's a good boy, but at school it was so easy to lead him astray. No offense, Pi. Jay, but your sister wasn't a very good mother. Oh, here comes my friend. Call me when you find out what's wrong with the car. We'll put up more signs about Mr. Mittens," Mary Lou said as she took a stack of signs from the front seat and got into her neighbor's car. PJ was sitting at his desk, thinking about Rose Baker, when his thoughts were interrupted by Billy peeking through the door. "Mrs. Hodges's radiator needs replacing. There's a hole in it." "What's happened? She hardly ever drives this car. Could you identify what kind of knocking noise she was describing?" Billy nodded his head. "These are related problems. That's what caused the hole in the radiator," Billy said, placing the remains of the 2-inch disc on the table. Half of the disc was deformed and bent. On one side it read R and below tens. Mr. Mittens must have climbed into the engine compartment and fallen asleep next to the radiator fan. It was the knocking sound she heard when she started the car. Mr. Mittens looked like he'd been put through a blender and his ID badge was stuck in the radiator. "Oh, damn, she loved that cat." PJ sighed, reaching for the phone and saying, "Call the parts store and order a new radiator. Better get new hoses too. I'll pay for it." Billy said, "I'll get the pressure washer and clean up the rest of Mr. Mittens." PJ nodded his head and then muttered, "When I died, they hosed me out of the tower." Billy just looked at PJ blankly. His uncle was the smartest man he knew, but he always said things that didn't make sense. Seeing Billy's confused look, PJ said, "Randall Gerald Billy. Randall Gerald. Find him." PJ dialed the number and waited for an answer. "Mrs. Hodges, we found Mr. Mittens." "Well, it wasn't what I would call hot at all," PJ said after watching the video. "Quite right, mate," Tim replied in his British Australian Kiwi accent. "I don't think she could enjoy it any less if she had a gun to her head." I almost felt guilty for her, seeing that fat little midget and his little wedding instrument dripping around her ass. But then I remembered that she's a liar, so screw her, Tom added. "How did you get the video and voice recordings?" asked PJ. "That's what we do, buddy," Tim replied. "It was easy. We could get more evidence, but what we have, along with your wife saying she loves him and their discussions about leaving their spouses, is probably all you need for a divorce. By the way, we also have all their emails and messages. Everything is on a flash drive," he finished, pointing to the device sticking out of his laptop. "They talk a lot about the upcoming town meeting and changes in the school system. Perhaps this will be useful for you, or not." "Oh, I'm sure this will be very useful," PJ said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "See you tomorrow, Billy Jackson," two Carlos shouted, leaving the service. "Billy Jackson?" PJ asked with a grin. Billy blushed. "That's what they started calling me in the workshop," he explained. Over the 2 years of working with PJ, his confidence has grown exponentially. With his increased confidence, PJ delegated more and more tasks to him, and PJ was surprised at how quickly Billy mastered all aspects of running a car dealership. Although PJ thought, in retrospect, he shouldn't have been surprised by Billy's quick learning curve. Both his mother and grandmother were smart women. Degenerate bitches, but still smart. "How is your girlfriend?" asked PJ. "Annie is great. She is a good student and wants to pursue a master's degree in education after completing her bachelor's degree. This brings me to what I wanted to talk to you about." "What's the matter, Billy Jackson?" PJ asked with a grin. Billy rolled his eyes at his uncle before turning serious. PJ, I am very grateful for everything you have done for me. You know that, right? I don't know where I would be in life if it weren't for you. Are you going to leave me? PJ asked with furrowed brows. Billy was someone he relied on and trusted. The thought of Billy leaving was unpleasant. Billy looked shocked. Never. I love this place. No, I want to say that I need to move out of the apartment you provided me with. Annie and I want to live together before we get engaged, so I need to find another place. Why do you want to move out? Why do you want to move out? This apartment is big enough for two, and you can't complain about the rent. What's the real reason? I can't ask her to live there. It's bad that Copperhead treats me like that, but I can't stand the thought of her treating Annie like that. Billy, I met your girlfriend, and I think she can handle Copper, your Aunt Carol. Besides, I can almost guarantee that Carol won't cause any trouble for you or Annie. Give me a few weeks to resolve some issues. Today. PJ looked in surprise at the number of people gathered. School board meetings were not usually crowded, but PJ suggested that today's topic had generated a lot of interest among concerned Jackson County residents. He turned his attention to the student council members sitting in a row on the stage of the school auditorium, so that the two council members at the ends of the row were almost looking at each other. Elmer Hudson, interim superintendent of schools, and Carol Jackson, interim principal of Jackson Schools, sat in the center of a row of board members. Student council president Aaron Hayes sat next to Elmer. PJ watched as the crowd gradually filled the hall. The place was almost full and people were still coming in. PJ watched as Margie Hudson, Elmer's portly and commanding wife, walked majestically to the front row and took the seat reserved for her. When the flow of people entering had dried up and the noise in the hall had died down, the chairman announced the beginning of the meeting and said a prayer. After this, the council moved on to the main topic of the meeting, as his grandmother Laura would say, cleaning up rats' nests. Elmer Hudson stood up and began his speech. I want to thank each of you for coming to today's meeting. This topic is so important that I felt it was necessary for everyone in Jackson County to hear it in person. I have here a list of books, Elmer Hudson continued, that are available for checkout at the high school library. Elmer pressed a button on the remote control, and a PowerPoint slide appeared on the screen behind the board members, showing a list of books and their authors. These books contain examples of racism and immorality so shocking that even the most hardened of souls would be outraged if read aloud. In my opinion, Elmer continued, as an educational professional, these books should not be available to high school students. Some of these books are racist, some depict sexual and deviant acts, and some of them are simply immoral and should not be on our library shelves. Any book that does not promote the values and ideals on which this country is founded should be excluded from the school library. You taxpayers should not have to pay for this garbage. There was a general murmur among the crowd, as well as applause from some of the council members sitting on the stage as Elmer sat down with a satisfied smile. Carol Jackson nodded her head and patted Elmer on the back, as if acknowledging a job well done. PJ looked at the audience. He saw a few nods of approval, which bothered him, but he also saw many puzzled or angry faces, including an almost apoplectic expression on Rabbi Stein's face. PJ noticed that several audience members were looking in his direction. He closed his eyes and sighed heavily. Well, there is no time like the present. In the center aisle of the hall, a few feet from the stage, there was a stand with a microphone. PJ stood up and walked towards the podium. As he stood behind the podium facing those gathered on stage, the conversations in the audience died down as everyone turned their attention to him. After all, the Jackson family was one of the founders of Jackson County, and PJ served on both the city council and county commission. No one could help but notice that his wife, Carol, was sitting on stage next to the interim superintendent. I have some reservations about your list, Elmer, PJ said. Elmer stood up and said in the most patronizing tone, I believe that in a situation like this, where the topic is so important, we should address each other more formally as befits the seriousness of the matter. Elmer said, Please call me Mr. Hudson. What's your objection, Mr. Jackson? He almost chuckled out loud when he humiliated the man he cheated with. PJ rolled his eyes. If you're going to insist on a level of formality that we've never seen before in these meetings, then please call me Dr. Jackson, PJ said with a strong accent on doctor. Why should I call you that? You're not a doctor, Elmer said with a mocking tone in his voice. He waved Carol away as she tried to get his attention. This is actually Dr. Perry Jackson, Ph.D., PJ said. I understand that you have a master's degree in education, but I went all the way and got my degrees higher and deeper, PJ smiled, referring to the old joke about the meaning of the letters Ph.D. Red-faced and clearly confused, Elmer Hudson stuttered for several seconds before deciding that retreat was the better part of valor. Used car salesman with a Ph.D. Impossible. He looked down at Carol, who was nodding her head vigorously. Crap. Very good, Dr. Jackson, Elmer said in as patronizing a tone as possible. What are your objections? My first objection is that I see on your list The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. This book is considered one of the greatest novels not only of the 19th century, but of any century. Why is she on your list? Elmer shook his head at the used car salesman's confusion. The book is full of racist language. A book containing so many racial slurs and epithets has no place in a school library, Elmer replied with a smug grin. Do you understand what this book is about? Asked PJ. Twain was very careful in his use of language. The runaway slave Jim is the kindest, most humane and worthy character in the entire novel. This would not be so obvious without Twain's intentional use of offensive, racist language to serve as a contrast to Jim's humanity. The racists in the book emphasize Jim's kindness. Otherwise, they're just a bunch of idiots, and Jim is just a good guy who escaped slavery and floats down the river on a raft. Is this what you don't like? That an escaped slave is a good guy? Of course not, Elmer replied indignantly. I despise Twain's use of racist language, even if it serves the purpose you say, which I'm not entirely sure of, Hudson countered. Since this is my area of expertise, I can assure you that my interpretation is correct. Have you even read this book? There were more nods and murmurs from the audience. PJ heard snippets of the conversation as the crowd whispered, watched Mickey Rooney play Huckleberry Finn on Turner Classic Movies last week. He wants to ban Mickey Rooney. I loved that book as a kid. I also see that Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird is on your list. I know you don't. It was a brutal showdown. She shook her head at what had happened. The school board will be meeting to discuss Elmer, but what about your wife? She's a good teacher and needs a job, but I don't think she's cut out for management, so I'd put her back in the classroom. But hey, don't let me influence the school board. Whoever is chosen to be superintendent, it looks like the first thing they'll have to do is hire a new principal for the school, PJ said thoughtfully. At that moment, Rose Baker approached PJ. There was a smile on her face, but that didn't stop her from slightly scolding PJ. You didn't indicate something in your resume, right? She asked with feigned severity. Maybe something as small as a doctorate. PJ raised his hands in a mea culpa gesture. I wasn't 100% sure how it would go, so I didn't want to look even stupider by mentioning it. Luckily, Elmer set himself up, baked and with an apple in the mouth. Erin shook her head, not at all surprised by PJ's friendship with the supposed new superintendent. Erin Jackson Hayes, as well as her brother Wayne and sister Karen, had known PJ all his life, and nothing about his behavior surprised them. Not as much as their Uncle Straight Jackson and his sparkler trick, but still. Erin married young, took her husband's last name, and became a devoted wife, loving mother, top president, school board member, and now president of the council. She had never accepted any of the Jackson nicknames, although she thought, as she watched Elmer walk off stage, Jackson Hayes Terminator sounded pretty cool. 15 years later, Billy Plaid Jackson looked out appreciatively at his parking lot from the sidewalk that ran parallel to the street in front of his dealership. Billy J. was constantly rearranging cars in the parking lot and experimenting with different arrangements. We had to keep the place fresh and attractive. As one of the owners of the largest independent auto dealership in Central Texas, Billy J. had an obligation to his customers and the community to present a positive image. He learned this from his uncle, the previous Plaid Jackson. Billy J. reflected that a lot has changed in Jackson County over the past decade and a half. It seemed like such a long time ago when Annie, his wife of 13 years, was working the counter at Dairy Queen and attending Jackson County Community College. From there, Annie earned a bachelor's degree in education, after which she was hired as a math teacher at Jackson High School. She then received her master's degree and 4 years later her doctorate. Over the years, the couple had 3 children. Several years after receiving her master's degree, Annie was promoted to principal of Jackson High School, despite the outcry and complaints of the school's head teacher, Carol Hudson, formerly Carol Jackson. Carol stayed in Jackson City because she had nowhere to go. She left Stamps, Arkansas, decades ago, so she had nothing there. At least she had a home and a job in Jackson City. After her affair was discovered, Elmer's wife kicked him out of the house before putting it up for sale and moving the teenagers in with her parents in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Elmer got a job as assistant principal at Bourne High School, 30 minutes outside of Jackson City. He held this position for 2 years until he died of a heart attack during mediocre sex with his new wife, Carol Hudson. Unfortunately, all of his insurance policies still named his ex-wife as a beneficiary, and Elmer had taken out loans from his 401k to fund his legal fight with his wife, so Carol was left with nothing but a bill for the poorly attended funeral of her husband, with whom she lived for several months. When Annie was promoted to director, everyone thought Carol would leave, but that wasn't the case. She needed money, so she tightened her belt and continued teaching, all the while remaining a thorn in the side of Annie, her boss, whom Carol often called the convict's wife. That all changed when Annie put her on something called a performance improvement plan. In all my years at Jackson High School, no one had ever heard of such a thing, let alone experienced one. It was a moment of realization for Carol. After that, she kept her head down and her mouth closed. But change was brewing again. Roisin Jackson, the superintendent of schools, would retire in a year, and Annie was slated to be named the new superintendent. Upon learning of this, Carol clenched her teeth so hard that she broke one of them. A prisoner's wife. Carol felt it was like rubbing salt into wounds that were already open from the cruel blows of karma. Every time she drove past that damn parking lot and saw a prisoner standing there in one of those ridiculous plaid jackets, she felt deep pain for all her bad life decisions. Roisin and her husband, PJ, moved from the farm several years ago, passing it on to Billy and his family in a trust. PJ and Rose bought a home close to downtown Jackson City and its thriving food and art scene. They were able to enjoy life downtown and be close to PJ's father, Philip, who, thanks to his GP wife Benita, was in remarkable shape for an octogenarian stroke survivor. The city's proximity to Austin and the fact that the Colorado River flowed through the city made it a haven away from the hustle and bustle that Austin had become. Every day, PJ and Rose could be found strolling the sidewalks of downtown, greeting people and dining at the many cafes, bistros, and restaurants that lined the shady sidewalks of downtown Jackson City. PJ moved further and further away from running the car dealership as Billy rose in rank and showed a level of maturity and kindness that neither his mother nor his ex-aunt knew he possessed. All 3 of his children loved working at the car dealership and learning the ins and outs of the car business. The eldest, Pidgey, would ask his mother to buy him the brightest plaid jackets she could find online or in the catalog of the pro shop at the Jackson County Country Club to wear while he helped his father at the car dealership. Pidgey knew it was his destiny to become the next Plaid Jackson after his father, and he wanted to be prepared. Laura and Betty, named after his late great-grandmother and great-grandmother, respectively, were also at home in both the office and the retail floor. After college, they wanted to join their older brother in the family business, so Plaid Jackson's future at Superior Cars and Trucks was assured for decades to come. Billy J. knew that somewhere out there, Peter Jackson, the original Plaid Jackson, was looking down and happy that his legacy lived on. As Billy J. held out his handkerchief to wipe a speck of dust off his cowboy boots, he noticed wear on the heels and made a mental note that it was time to replace the soles again. Fortunately, the boots themselves were in good condition. With proper care, Python leather boots will last a lifetime. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.